well, I guess, sorry, I got interrupted there. Smaller group than last time, not because our speaker isn't wonderful today and this isn't a fantastic topic, but our speaker last time, he was, oh good, here's Eli, had a lot of, I guess, connections in various communities who would like to listen to it. Anyway, this is a very, very timely topic and especially of interest to those using R in the federal government or government. And I suspect it's, and we'll learn more about this from David, but I suspect it's not just R, but open source software, so maybe Python and other open source tools too. So he's graciously allowed us to record this. So those who are missing it can always listen to it later on our YouTube channel. And so we have that resource. I'm still uploading videos to it. It's in my ball court right now. Donna sent me everything, so I just have to get them uploaded. So be sure and subscribe. We need subscribers, and let your friends and family know about our channel. All right. I guess one other, so David, I guess, did you want to mention the POSIT conference? I can let you do that. I think you had it up, and but I'll pass the platform over to you so you could tell us about the POSIT conference and introduce yourself and give us a talk. And at the end, I will just announce the September talk for R Govys because we have that scheduled, but I will announce that at the end. All right, so go ahead, David. I will pass the podium, I guess, to you.
Sure. And to introduce myself, I'm Dave Smith. I've joined EPA around 2010 or thereabouts from the private sector. My background was primarily geospatial, remote sensing, modeling, hydrology, things like that. And I found myself in EPA's IT shop, helping to support a lot of the work being done across multiple program offices in our regions. And so, the cool thing about that is I get to work with a lot of really great teams, play with a lot of really cool technology, things like that. And yeah, since you mentioned the POSIT conference, as I was getting my slides teed up and screen share going, we were talking a little bit about the RStudio conference that's coming up in Chicago very shortly. And I guess some folks weren't aware that there is a virtual option. It's actually, if you're a Fed, it's only $49. It does not include the workshops, but still, that's a pretty good deal. So yeah, definitely would encourage folks to look into that. And I did post the link for the POSIT conference in the chat. Let's see if I can get my slides back. And so what I was going to talk about today is what we've been doing at EPA with regard to supporting our RStudio users. As Ann knows, we have a really nice community of our users across EPA doing a lot of really great work. And historically, we had kind of struggled a bit with how do we publish shiny apps, things like that. And so there's been kind of a whole series of collaborations with our Office of Research and Development, who Ann works for, and our group, which is in our Office of Information Management. And so I'll dive into that, starting out with our team. So I work with a group called the Information Access Analytics Services Division, and our group, we get to do a lot of the really cool stuff. We support EPA's GeoPlatform, so ArcGIS Online and things like that. We also have a Qlik Cloud implementation, which has been really really popular for folks who want to be able to build dashboards and really quick sharing ability for data visualizations, all kinds of nifty things like that. We also do a lot of work with a number of enterprise applications, including like the EJ screen, which a lot of folks use for environmental justice. There's also NEPA Assist for the National Environmental Policy Act screening, and So there's a bunch of public-facing tools. We also have Envirofacts, which has been around for close to 30 years as a public-facing data warehouse. So, there's a lot of work that our team does to kind of wrangle data, process data, do a lot of kind of data crunching, geospatial enablement, things like that. And so one of the newest additions to that, over the last couple of years, we've been diving more into like the data science side of things. We have a hosted environment in AWS that folks can log into and run Jupyter notebooks. We've got like a whole wizard there that they can select how instance size they want, things like that. More recently, we've also been adding access to AWS SageMaker for machine learning, and RStudio has also been a big component of that. So yeah, R has as mentioned, really robust, really diverse community of R users. There's over 900 installs of the RStudio IDE, and a lot of our work has been primarily centered with Office of Research and Development, although there's also a lot of a ton of R users in our Office of Air and other groups. But like 4D several years back got an instance of RStudio server up and running internally on our EPA network to get folks up and running, able to publish their Shiny apps. And then another thing that we had done several years back was to kind of cobble together an instance of open source RStudio running on cloud.gov that folks could use to publish Shiny apps as well. It was kind of a little bit of a kludgy environment on cloud.gov. There was some complexity to being able to publish and manage apps in it. I think there was also a lot of constraints with regard to the Cloud Foundry pivotal build pack process, what it would support, what it wouldn't support. So there was always a lot of wrinkles there, but yeah, some folks have been able to use that. But more recently, that RStudio, that internal RStudio server instance, the license was coming due, and so our folks, our partners in ORD, looked at, should we consider RStudio Connect as a kind of an upgrade to RStudio server? And so we worked with them. Initially we started out with 100 named users, got a server environment up and running. And it's actually become really popular, and we've already upgraded to 200 users. And one of the nice things there too is the way they license it is it's named users. If you need to log in, that consumes a seat for named user license. But there's unlimited server instances that you could run. And then the other part is that if you do have a public-facing server, they have two different models. One is like a high availability server if you're expecting huge loads of huge amounts of traffic coming to it, or you could stick with the regular licensing, which constrains you to the number of concurrent users as you have. So we've got 200 named users, so we can have 200 concurrent users on the public-facing instance, even if they're anonymous. And for our purposes, that seemed like it would work just fine. We're not like the New York Times where they'll run a story and they get 1 million viewers, or at least hopefully that's going to be the case. I think USGS has been able to do a similar thing from what I understand as well. But anyway, I'll kind of dive into a bit more about Posit Connect and what it brings to the table. You mentioned Python, which is kind of another really cool thing, is the name change from RStudio to Posit. They're trying to branch out a bit more into the Python space as well. So yeah, they have rebranded it to Posit Connect, formerly known as RStudio Connect. It is commercially supported. It has a lot of extra bells and whistles to it that the open source does not. Some of the nice capabilities that you can do with Posit Connect are being able to run scheduled tasks, like if you have a data refresh, if you have other types, like if you have a machine learning model that you need to rerun and retrain on a periodic basis. There's a number of capabilities there that you can do with the scheduling. There's also a lot of nice capabilities beyond just the Shiny apps, but you could also publish a Jupyter notebook to it. You could publish Python Streamlit, Python Dash, quite a few other things. And then they've also been heavily promoting the Quarto as kind of the R Markdown on steroids, which is also kind of a nice feature. And it looks like they're continuing to add a lot of functionality to it. For us, one of the key things was being able to integrate with our enterprise single sign-on. That was previously had been a pain point with our cloud.gov instance that we were running Shiny on. So there were some things like that. There was also a lot of support, from the corporate side of Posit for database connections and other types of things, being able to have fine-grained role-based access, which I'll touch on a little bit later too. So as we've been evolving and maturing our capabilities for data analytics, several years back, I think like 6 or 7 years now, it's already been, we started delving into Amazon Cloud. And right from the outset, we started out with a vision of being able to build out a data management, data analytics environment in AWS with the intent of ultimately being able to house potentially CBI data, Qlik, other types of more sensitive data. So from the outset, we pursued a FISMA moderate authorization to operate. And so we were able to get that environment stood up, and we were able to go through our third-party assessment and get it accredited and signed off on, and so that kind of got us up and running with a platform that we start building some of these capabilities out in. So within that environment, I mentioned we've got like a Jupyter Notebooks environment. We've got a bunch of RDS database instances, a bunch of other things that we're using, data lake environment for wrangling data, doing a lot of that type of work. And what we've been, looking to do throughout that is to kind of have hopefully lessen some of the effort and headaches of trying to navigate agency policies and FISMA controls and things like that, for being able to, get data in, wrangle and analyze the data, and then being able to visualize it and publish out some of those visualizations through RStudio Connect, through our GeoPlatform, through Qlik, and other tools like that. And so kind of setting up, not just the technology, but also kind of the governance and the some of the processes, and getting those things documented and more easy to use and easily accessible for our users. So essentially trying to democratize data science as much as we can for EPA users. So we do have, as part of our security requirements, we don't directly allow our users to publish directly to public production servers, but we do have it set up so that we've got an RStudio Connect instance set up that they can use as a staging server, so they can put their apps up on it, test them, try them out, do whatever tweaks they need to do. If they need to do like an internal clearance process or have other folks review it, they're able to bring folks into that live app in that staging environment, things like that. They're able to constrain who's allowed to see it, who isn't allowed to see it. So there's a lot of really nice capabilities there. And there's a number of different ways that they can interact with that RStudio Connect instance as well. Whether they're maintaining their code base in Git and publishing to the server from Git, or using the direct publishing from the RStudio ID or other things. I'll show some of that later. There's a lot of options. Makes it really, gives you a lot of flexibility. And some of it is also out of necessity, being able to support Python and other users, not just our community. And so part of that process too is, they're able to get their app on the staging server, kick the tires, test it, have folks, review it, get whatever clearances they need. And then, once they've kind of gone through all that kind of pre-flight work, then they can let us know. It's like, okay, we're ready to promote this app to production. And so we've got like a set of processes that kicks off too. where they can select a vanity URL, and I'll show that later too. How a friendly name for their app, things like that. If they want it to run on a certain schedule, if who they want to allow access to, see the app, interact with it, all of those kinds of things. And then part of that process also involves doing security scans and things like that as required by our security controls for FSMA. And then
Hey,
yes,
I'm sorry, David. I hopefully it's okay to interrupt you with a question.
sure.
Okay. And I forgot to make that comment too before we started, since it's okay with Dave, that if you do have a question, just raise your hand and we will call on you. So just to be,
Lost
yeah.
my chat window there.
Oh, okay. And just to clarify, to make sure I'm on the right page. So these apps, they could be both internal and external, so public facing also?
Yes, we do have separate servers for internal and public facing, and I'll get into that in the next slide. But yeah, we currently have our production environment for internal, and we just got our approval to be able to stand up our public facing server. And so essentially, this diagram kind of shows that, we've got internal production server, we've got a public facing production server. But from our developer side, they can either publish to that staging server using Git, or directly from their desktop, or however they're working using the packages. There's an RS Connect package and things like that they can use, and then kind of going through that process of reviewing their app, getting whatever approvals they need, and then letting our team know it's like, yeah, it's ready to go to production, where we'll scan it, and then we'll push the app to whichever production server it's intended for, based on that audience and that procedure. And some of those procedures, we've got a number of like existing things that we had to fold into the process. There's our Office of Research and Development has like a whole process for requesting projects and ensuring that they kind of go through ORD clearance. And some of the other programs have similar needs, and so we also are been putting together like guidance and documentation on here's where you go depending on what office you're in, and what can if you need to, does this need to go to our Office of Public Affairs or our web council or folks like that, along with other guidance too, like if this is going to be a public facing app, we want to make sure you're using an EPA template, EPA look and feel. We want to give you some guidance on 508 compliance, and here's how to use Color Brewer to pick a color safe palette for your charts and graphs, and a lot of odds and ends like that we've been compiling as documentation and guidance and things like that for users as they kind of build their apps. And so yeah, there's a bunch of those kinds of questions that we'll also put out there. It's like making sure that if they're going to publish an app, is it connecting to a live data source? Is it being refreshed on a recurring basis? Is there some maintenance frequency to it? Is there sensitive data? Does the privacy office need to review it if there's PII, which that we would keep on the internal side, and we would also restrict it to a list of specific users who would be allowed to access it, those types of things. And then also some of the other considerations, like if it's a fairly self-contained app model that has a smallish data set, that could potentially just be hosted right on the server. But if you need like a database connection to Postgres or things like that, making sure that we can work to make sure that we've got whatever firewall rules or other things in place, so that the RStudio Connect server can see that database to be able to connect to it and consume data from it and things like that. And it's got the right privileges and everything like that. So yeah, those are some of the things that we try to work out up front as folks are going through that publishing process, so they don't hit any snags down the road as they try to publish to their apps. And so yeah, there's a bunch of different types of roles that is kind of nice to see in the Posit Connect. Like the broadest wide open one is the last one, anonymous public access, and that's where anybody can see the app. But then on the authenticated side, it's like you could have an individual person with publishing rights where only that user can update and maintain the application, or you might have a team who's working on an app where you can add collaborators who will also have publishing privileges for that particular app. So if you've got two different developers who are maintaining a Shiny app, they would both be able to push updates to that app. And then there's also authenticated viewers. By default, when you first log into the server, you get a view only role. And then we, if it's a developer, we would manually promote them to the publisher role. And then, but as a viewer, you're only able to view things that you're explicitly allowed to view. So if somebody publishes their Shiny app and they're on the staging server, for example, it's like, well, this is not ready for prime time. I really only want this handful of users to be able to view it. Then they could select like this authenticated group of viewers, where they could manually specify, I need NVEGA, I need, these 5 people able to view this app, to be able to kick the tires on it for clearance or for whatever things. And then nobody else would be able to see it other than that specific list of users. So there's a lot of really nice fine-grained access controls, right out of the box in Posit Connect, and it ties right in with our agency single sign-on and things like that. So it makes things really easy, and kind of helps a lot with meeting security requirements. Yeah, and as I mentioned,
I'm sorry, Dave, could you go back to the previous slide?
Sure. Yep.
So when you say the anonymous public access, anyone may view the content, does that mean the code that built the app, or does that just mean the use of the app?
Just the use of the app.
Okay, so in other words, if you had an app that was, a dashboard and was summarizing data or something, I'm just a user, I could have anonymous public access just to use that dashboard then.
Yep. Although I think it would probably be good too if somebody does have a public facing app, it's always good to encourage them to share their code too. In which case, if they're housing it in a Git repo, that's something too where if they've got like their most current code and they do want to share it with the public, for other folks to be able to grab it and make their own variant of the app or whatever they want to do, or that Git can be tied in as well. I think I've got a slide on Git coming up as well.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't know how whether, I agree with you about code. That's my opinion. The sort of the reason for having open source software is to share the code.
Yep.
I see Eli has a question, but so we'll let her chime in. But I was wondering, after Eli, if you could say a little bit about that last bullet. Consider that any logged in user consumes a named user license seat, because that's always kind of confused me about the Shiny cloud accounts that Posit has, where you could buy like an account on their cloud. So anyway, we can come back to that because Eli has a question.
Yep.
Go ahead, Eli.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, if the app is intended to be public facing, then it's like, do you need users to log in? If it's if your intent is for it to be public facing, then anonymous public access is probably the best way to go. And then you don't have to worry about individual users and keeping tabs on recycling seats or whatever you need to do there. Whereas if for example you had a public facing app that you only, like in our case, we have a lot of projects where we're working closely with like a state co-regulator or a tribe or folks like that, where we might want to just have a handful of folks from that state or from that tribe able to log in Nobody else is able to see or access that app, just the folks who actually log in, and they would be the only ones able to see it. But again, for each one of those users, we need to make sure we've got enough licenses to accommodate each named user. But for the public access, if it's anonymous, just go to this website. You don't need to log in, and you can see the nice interactive shiny app. There, the constraint when you're not logged in is just number of concurrent users. And so in our case, we've got 200 licenses, and that's also 200 anonymous concurrent users could be hitting the server at a given time.
Okay, so that really helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have you hit that capacity yet, or maybe it's just
No,
okay?
not yet. Yeah, I don't anticipate we'll hit it soon, but as the popularity of our environment grows, maybe we will.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, thanks,
Yeah.
David. But Eli, go ahead and ask.
Yeah, hi David, that's really great. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that FSMA moderate and
Yep.
what kind of data that allows you to have versus FSMA low. Well, we have confidential fisheries data over in NOAA fisheries, so we're always trying to figure out how can we have this up on our development platforms.
Yeah, FSMA moderate will cover CUI, controlled unclassified information, which would typically be like trade sensitive, confidential business information, a lot of things like that. And so yeah, that would probably be the categorization that you would want, is moderate for your fisheries data. But yeah, it would be always good to confirm that with your folks. One of the other things that we do have for our DMAP environment is what's called a system of record notice, which basically, if we wanted to house PII data as well, it's like if we had like a list of employees and their home addresses. We don't currently have anything like that in our environment, but we did go ahead and put in the additional process, and basically there's a whole thing where you actually have to get this system of record notice, and it goes into like the Federal Register and a bunch of things like that. But we did go ahead and obtain that, so that if at some point we need to house PII data in our environment, we would need to do that as well. But that's kind of above and beyond the moderate. For if it was like secret, then you'd need a high, but yeah, we don't have any secret. I think at EPA we might only have like 1 or 2 systems that have data that actually needs a high. At any rate, yeah, so some of the things too is, we try to, we've had a lot of really good experience working with a number of folks across the agency on publishing data visualizations and apps. And so like in the process of that, we, try to, like, for example, we've had a lot of interest in Esri story maps, for one. It's, it's a nice way to kind of do storytelling with data, being able to, not just have maps with ArcGIS Online, but also being able to pull in multimedia video clips and other kinds of things. So those have been really popular. Likewise, I mentioned our Qlik Cloud environment. Just we've had a lot of enthusiasm from a lot of folks across the agency in terms of making it easier for our practitioners, for our in-house SMEs to be able to do their analytics work and things like that, and be able to share it and collaborate with folks more effectively using web-based technology, using the cloud, with these interactive things. And so as part of that too, kind of since our team helps to facilitate that, not just for this RStudio environment, but also for that GeoPlatform, Esri story maps, Qlik, things like that. We've been trying to like compile as many resources as we can to kind of help guide folks, like help them think it through, considering their audience, what level of technical expertise might they have. Is there additional contextual info you might want to put in there, instead of just, throwing them into, here's this interactive graph with some buttons and widgets, and, without really giving a lot of explanation into, how to actually use the app and how to interpret the results and things like that. We've also been trying to compile, make it easier for folks to get like our EPA look and feel. So some of our developers who are most eager to, our first few folks that we started onboarding into this RStudio environment, like one Andy Shapiro, he was gung ho, and I mentioned, hey, I don't suppose you could take a look at like the EPA template. He's like, sure thing. So he dove right into it and adapted our EPA web template and things like that with our look and feel and our headers and footers and stuff like that for some of the apps that he was building. And and he was primarily focused on Python, and so he built some Dash and Streamlit apps in Python and was able to publish those to our Connect server. And so it's like, yeah, let's grab those, the work that he did in being able to adapt those templates for RStudio Connect and make those available in a GitHub repo for other EPA users to be able to just grab those and build upon them and plug their own content into them, things like that. Same with Shiny and other apps. And so trying to compile that list of resources and repos and things like that folks can use. There's also a lot of the other things that we try to focus on too, like 508 compliance. Using alt text wherever you can. If you've got graphics, and so sometimes it's kind of hard to envision how can you do that with an interactive chart or graph. But as long as you've got some descriptive info, just kind of giving folks the context of what the story being told is, and things like that, trying to help fill those gaps as much as possible. And likewise, resources like Color Brewer, which is really helpful for color blindness and coming up with visually appealing palettes of colors that can be used. We've also been working on kind of color families, color palettes that work really well with some of our templates and things like that internally. And so, yeah, trying to compile a lot of that guidance into documents that we can then make available for our folks to make it really easy and for them to figure out how to address a lot of those challenges. And as I mentioned too, just also giving them guidance on what do you need to think about, kind of if you're going to make a public-facing app, what reviews might you want to have occur, like our Office of Public Affairs or other folks, and maybe also if they wanted to coordinate it with a press release or other kinds of things like that. So yeah, we try to help our users with a lot of those considerations as well. Yeah, so in terms of publishing, they've made it really, really easy to publish from the RStudio IDE. It's like one button click once you're connected to the server. And I'll basically show how to set that up in the next slide. But yeah, the IDE is definitely the easiest way to publish anything R related. There's also publishing from Python. There's a few more kind of manual steps and things like that involved. And you could also, kind of have a scripted process for publishing. And as I mentioned, get back to publishing as well, which I'll touch on. But to get set up from the IDE, that's super easy. It's right from the menu. You can basically just click through the tools, options, and then publishing, and then point it at the URL for our staging server, and then it'll redirect you to the login screen for the staging server, and you log in, and behind the scenes it generates an API key and all that kind of stuff, and gets it all set up and just returns it right back to your ID. And then magically you have these nifty blue buttons like I've got in the top corner that show up all throughout your IDE, which let you do all kinds of things, not just Shiny apps, but like even an individual plot or other kinds of things. All of a sudden the the little button hold here, and you can publish all kinds of content right from the IDE with one button click. If you're not using the IDE, or if you have like some other uh, scripting or automation, other kinds of things that you need to do, and to be able to publish to the server through its APIs, or through like they have a set of packages, these RS Connect packages, which help enable the publishing from R or from Python. There is an additional step that you need to do manually there, which is logging into the RStudio Connect server, and then there's a little button where you can generate and manage API keys. And so once you've got that API key, then you can kind of move on to the next steps of configuring your environment to be able to publish. And so, like, if you're manually publishing from R, if you're, for whatever reason you're not doing it from the IDE, it's pretty easy. There's just install this package, and then there's a function within the package to basically plug in the server parameters of the server URL, your account name, and then that ID, that API key that you generated in the previous step. And then there's like a deploy app function too, where and what's kind of interesting about how the publishing process works is I think behind the scenes they're using a thing called PackRat, which inspects the application, kind of scans through it, looks at any dependencies, also if there's a data file sitting in that directory that your app needs, things like that. It'll basically grab all of that stuff up, bundle it up into a deployment package, and then it'll use an API call on the RStudio Connect server to push that content to it and get it deployed and configured in that environment. And so that is essentially the same process that works, from R as well as for Python and things like that. And they have a really nice set of APIs on the Connect server too, that like even if you wanted to monitor the RStudio Connect server from a different environment, like whether it's sending logs to Splunk, or like if we wanted to pull an inventory of all of our apps into another dashboard someplace else, things like that. There's some really nice APIs on the Connect server that let you do a lot of that type of work. And their documentation sometimes might lag a version behind, but it's been pretty helpful, a lot of really good info on the ins and outs of using Connect in their documentation. So we haven't had to call our rep Jeremy Allen too often. Every once in a while, we might run into one little snag or another, but yeah, a lot of it's been really easy for us to set up and configure and manage ourselves. So that's been really helpful. Let's see, did I miss anything? Yeah, I could leap on to Python. So yeah, it's a similar type of thing to publish to the server from Python.
Dave, I'm just to interrupt because I think Eli has a question. Sorry.
I think you may be getting into it because my question was about Python, and specifically about Python apps, because Shiny is not so common for publishing Python apps, and you might get to it, but I was just wondering if the platforms supported some of the more common things like Streamlit. Streamlit is the one I'm familiar with, but there are others.
Yes, it does. Yeah, and you could also, kind of fold Python in with into an R app using Reticulate. And I think even Quarto docs, you can combine R code and Python with Reticulate. But yeah, you can also publish, Streamlit apps, Dask apps, Flask, Jupyter notebooks, a whole bunch of things like that. And the kind of the magic sauce there, again, it's a package called RS Connect. In this case, it's RS Connect -Python that basically sets up, it's a Python command line tool that lets you kind of configure and manage that publishing process. And let's see, might be a little hard to see on this bottom of the screen, but it's a similar type of thing to configure it. It's like RS Connect, add server, and then the server URL, and then give it a name and an API key, info like that. So it's pretty straightforward to get it configured in Python. And then once you've got that connection configured, then there's, you can verify that the connection works. There's also some other, suggestions just in terms of best practices. Like a lot of our folks, might be using, well, not so much Anaconda so much anymore with some of the constraints happening there. But if you're using like pip virtual environments, things like that, making sure that you've got, the right environment activated and things like that before you go to publish the app. Otherwise, the publish might fail. It might not find the right dependencies or things like that. So, kind of be mindful of your Python environment. If you have multiple Python environments, some of us do. Other folks might only have one app that they're worrying about. But yeah, there's, and then once you've got that connection configured, you verify that it's working, with this rs connect list command. Then there's an rs connect deploy command, and then they've got a few different flavors of that. We'll add a few additional configurations like rs connect deploy streamlit. There's like you can specify entry point of the app is main.py or those kinds of things. And similar, if it's a dash app or other types of apps, they have, again, they have some really good documentation on doing this. And my kind of tinkering around with a bunch of the different flavors, that found it pretty quick and easy to get up and running without too many snags. So again, the documentation is really good. One of the things with Jupyter notebooks, they do have some extensions that are available for Jupyter. So if you've got a Jupyter environment, there's a RS Connect Jupyter package, which you can install and enable that extension. And then, it's got its little JavaScript widget magic that it does that will also add that blue publish button to your Jupyter notebook environment. And so again, that's like a one button click once you're connected and everything like that. So anyway, yeah. Do I have anything else publishing wise? Yeah, that probably covers most of the publishing stuff. So yeah, as I mentioned, we currently let our users publish directly to this staging server, where they can, test their apps. They can share their apps with other groups of users for collaboration purposes. If they need a review or things like that. There's by default, when you publish an app to RStudio Connect, it'll give it a name with like a really long GUID, like a really long string of numbers and letters as the name of the app. And so that's kind of the default. But there is an ability to assign a custom name to that app. So like we've got a few users. Actually, that's not too much friendlier, EE_DBCalc, but if folks do want to have a custom name that's friendlier, they can provide that to us when we go to production. And so yeah, that's part of our process. When folks have kind of gotten their app up and running on a staging server, they're happy with how it's working, how it looks. They've had their whether it's their management, whether it's their other folks, give them clearance to go ahead and publish it, whether broadly across our internal EPA environments or publishing it to the public facing server. That then we'll ask them for, it's like, do you want a vanity URL that's so they can provide that friendlier name. We'll also want to ask them if there's any special access rules that they need, like, yeah, we're going to share this with our tribal folks, we don't want anyone else to be able to access it. And it's like, okay, so then we'll need to know who the users are that we need to add to it and things like that. Or it's like, no, this is public facing, we want anyone to be able to see it, then we'll set it up for anonymous access. Likewise, if there's a refresh process that they need to run, go out and fetch the updated file from this location, every night or whatever, and update the app, to set up that scheduling and things like that. And then likewise, we'll do a series of scans. We have some scans that we run continually with just as part of our security setup. We have tenable NASA scans that we run. I think our security plan requires that they just run on an automated basis every 72 hours. And but then we also have specific deeper scans that we do with like OWASP Zap. Like if it's a credentialed app, it'll actually need to log into the app and things like that to do a deeper dynamic application scan. But once that scan's been done, and if the app comes up with a clean bill of health, and that's a good thing to bear in mind too, is just not to take for granted what apps may be. I think there was recently like PyTorch, there was a vulnerability discovered there, and so some things like that. Definitely want to make sure that you're doing those scans before going to production, and just to meet all your security requirements and things like that, which I think I've got a slide that kind of touches on some of those things as well. But yeah, as I mentioned, there's a lot of really good out-of-the-box capabilities for managing apps, for managing users, managing the server. It's got a little internal dashboard that kind of tells you what's going on with like RAM usage, CPU usage, a lot of good things like that. We did see a few things that come up with like if you upgrade the server version, in some cases there may be like underlying packages that also get updated in the process. Because I think like one of the ones we ran into was it brought in a newer version of curl, which had like a different secure socket layer thing, and so it's like, oh, okay, so there was a couple of apps that broke because of incompatibility with the versions, I think there. But so there's that's another good case for having a separate staging server and separate production server, so that if you are upgrading one, you can make sure that it's working on your staging environment first before rolling it out to your production server, and then having apps break there. That you have more opportunity to do a rollback, and also being able to give your you also want to give your users advanced warning of it's like, hey, we're gonna upgrade the server this weekend and coming up, and when you come in Monday, test your apps, make sure they're all working and things like that. We also I think we had to make a few additional configuration updates on the out of the box install, like cookie policies, and there's like some header flags and things like that I think got flagged in our security scans, which those are pretty easy to do. Yeah, so yeah, a lot of the things like that are pretty configurable on the server, and again, they've got really good documentation on how to do some of those things. There was also a number of things that we noticed, like when we first started. A lot of our folks at EPA tend to be, EPA, we're all about place, and so we've got a lot of folks doing geospatial work, and so there's a lot of the R packages and as well as Python packages that have core dependencies like GDAL, the geospatial data extraction library, things like that are kind of buried down in the dependencies of a number of really popular packages like GeoPandas and things like that. So some of those, in some cases, like if you're installing on your desktop, yeah, depending on if folks are using pip versus conda, for example, in the Python space, you might get a pre-built binary for Windows for your desktop machine, or you might need to build the binary and have maybe there's a C file that needs to be built. for your particular machine. So that, that package doesn't care if you're running Linux or if you're running Windows, whatever, because it can build it on the fly. But the thing is, if you're pushing that process out to RStudio Connect and it doesn't have a compiler for C, then your app won't be able to deploy. So there's some things like that that we also needed to set up on that environment too, on that staging environment. Where like GDAL, for example, sometimes folks have trouble getting it installed on their machines because it might not have the right privileges, right permissions. Because it's like, if it's a Linux library that needs to be installed with sudo or things like that. So some of those, we did go pre-install in our environment, and so that made it a lot, made a lot of those apps deploy without any hiccups. And then likewise, for some of the ones that needed a C compiler, we were able to do that too. And again, we've got, we try to make sure that we've got our security scans and everything running so that nothing bad happens there too. Yeah, and the other thing I mentioned earlier is Conda. I'm sure some of your folks probably are aware that Anaconda is, I think they're trying to be mindful of licensing and things like that. I think part of it is their package repos get hit pretty heavily, so I think they're taking a closer look at if agencies or folks are hitting their repos. And so I know that there was like some talk a while back of just blacklisting domains if they didn't think they had licensing for it. And at EPA, we do have some Anaconda licensing through Esri, because Esri uses Anaconda as part of ArcGIS Pro. So we've got a lot of our users who already have Conda licensing that way. But on the POSIT side, they do not provide any Anaconda licensing. So that may be something too. I mean, typically we've been trying to figure out how to best navigate that with users and trying to make sure that if they have licensing to sure take advantage of it, but don't assume that it does exist elsewhere.
Hey, Dave, sorry to interrupt, but Eli has her hand up in a question.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Sorry, I have lots of questions. So I've been using Jupyter Hubs a lot, and one of the things that I like about that is that we can set it up where you can just pick the image that you want. So like if I need Python with a really heavy duty geospatial setup, I can pick that. If I want something that's set up for our ecosystem models and it's all installed, I can just select that, and I just am launched into this environment that has everything I need and everyone who's on the team needs. I didn't, when I played around with POSIT, kind of POSIT Cloud, I couldn't see that something like that is possible. And do you know anything about if it is?
Yeah, I don't know that it is yet. And it's certainly something that'll be interesting for POSIT to look into. One of the things that we've been doing at EPA is, I mentioned SageMaker earlier. SageMaker has that capability. SageMaker is primarily Jupyter focused, and they have a whole bunch of pre-built, like I said, frameworks that are already set up. Like if you're doing machine learning with PyTorch or TensorFlow, MXNet, they've got a whole bunch of these kind of pre-built quick starts that already have a bunch of the key dependencies already set up. But then you could also create your own custom containers. Like if you do need a whole bunch of specific geospatial packages or things like that. They did actually, I think when we first started playing with SageMaker, they did not have GDAL and some of the geo support, but they've added it more recently. So they've been building out quite a bit of that support too on the SageMaker side. But yeah, it's definitely useful capability to have, is kind of those pre-built environments. But yeah, I'm not aware that POSIT is doing anything with that currently. But yeah, who knows? We might see some things like that come up in the conference in a few weeks. But yeah, I'd be excited if that's a possibility. I'd definitely be a welcome addition.
Oh, we have another question from Chris. Go ahead and unmute.
Hello, you brought up, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I just was wondering, you brought up GDAL, and that's actually on one of my lists for our positive environment,
Mhm.
because we noticed it's not Yum installable. So we were just wondering, are you running Rail like 8 or 9, or what environment are you running on?
I think we're running Ubuntu.
Okay, that could possibly be it. So that's one of the things on my list is figure out, because it's not Yum installable. So
Yeah.
some of the dependencies that required. And then I had one other quick question was, we're still in the early part of our pilot, so we haven't like opened it to the connect to all the licenses we have for users. What kind of like system resource utilizations have you seen when you have like all your users onto Connect?
Um, I mean, we haven't really seen like we haven't really gotten hammered. Yeah, it's just kind of a steady, 2, 3, 4, kind of bubbling of users. Yeah, we haven't really had anything that's really hammered our server yet. So kind of fingers crossed that that continues to be the case. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And actually, I do have a slide here on, like the FSMA moderate and some things there too. And there were a bunch of things that, did come into play there. As I mentioned, we got our ATO before we had RStudio Connect. So part of what we have like a process too, where we'll do like a security impact assessment whenever we're adding a new component to our environment, where basically we'll go through and document, are there any changes, how are existing controls being met with this new package and things like that. So I kind of just threw together a quick slide bucketing some of those controls. Like there's the access control, identity access, and that's where like out of the box SAML integration for EPA single sign-on. It's like, okay, yep, boom, check that box. That helps. And similar like the fine-grained user access roles and things like that. So there was a lot of good stuff right out of the box. It was like, kind of document in our security impact assessment and put that in front of our security folks to review. And there's also kind of going back and updating any of our other documentation. But yeah, it was not too difficult. I think we actually had 3 different things combined in our security impact assessment. We're also rolling out a new data catalog with Elation, and then also we started working on trying to stand up an environment to support the AWS Open Data Program, and that was actually the one they had more questions and concerns about than RStudio Connect. But yeah, we were able to get RStudio Connect through without any trouble. So yeah, in terms of like auditing and things like that, there's Posit Connect does do really good logging, and that's another nice thing too. Like if your app's not working right, there's just one button click to get to the log to see, why is it not starting up, or if there's an error, you can get to those logs easily. And then you could also spool those logs if you have like agency continuous diagnostics and monitoring effort. Like we've got an enterprise Splunk environment where they're trying to kind of aggregate logs from across the agency for network flows for applications, identity and access, things like that, to be able to more effectively keep tabs on what's going on. There's also like the CM, the system inventory, all these different kinds of things that we're able to just spool that info right into other systems for monitoring and stuff like that. And so yeah, and likewise, I mentioned we do security scans and things like that. So for risk assessment, we basically just set up Tenable Nessus is like a recurring automated scan. There's also Trend Micro one that we have running in our AWS environment, things like that, for just trying to keep tabs on any vulnerabilities. And the other one for risk assessment was when we're promoting an app to production, we'll do more rigorous scanning using a WASP Zap with a with credentials and all that kind of stuff, so that we can make sure that we're doing that dynamic application security testing. Trying to think. Yeah, so some of the other ones too, just making sure you've got good processes for governance, for managing users, for making sure that folks are are doing due diligence where it comes to potentially sensitive data, going through their approval processes, their clearance processes, and things like that. So yeah, so there's a lot of those things we're able to kind of go through those different control groups and say, yep, we can address this way, and we already have things that we have in place that can we can just plug in for RStudio Connect and be off to the races. And so that was pretty seamless. Hopefully that'll be helpful for other folks too, as they're going through that process. And then yeah, and so this is just a screenshot of a dashboard of users. Yeah, we've been growing pretty quickly over the last year. We've gotten to over 150 users. And again, it's been really great working with our ORD partners. Provided the funding, got the licensing, helping make a lot of this happen. Yeah, it's been really good to get this up and running. And really great to see, the amount of enthusiasm. Yeah, some of our Python folks were just, thrilled to death. It's like, oh, this will make it so easy to get our Python, our Streamlit or our Dash apps, things like that. So yeah, definitely, yeah, good to see.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. I'm always amazed at how far ahead EPA is from the well, because I came from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and that's when I first met Jeff and Ann, and
Yeah.
they've just been out in they've been the leaders out in the forefront of getting these tools used. And of course now we have folks like Eli and others who are doing equally fantastic things. So you're showing us the way is super helpful for us.
Yeah,
and it gives us hope too.
yeah, I'll post my email in the chat too. Oops.
So you gave us a lot of great information in the slides, but I think you mentioned, oh good, thanks Dave. I think you mentioned that you were creating like best practices, I guess, kind of documentation for the developers of the apps and things.
Yeah.
So is that correct?
Yeah, I do have like a document that we're iterating on. Let's throw that over here. Hopefully that's still on the share. Yeah, where we've been kind of compiling a bunch of info, like guidance, resources, things like that on a variety of things. And I could share this too if it's helpful for others. But yeah, and and also if there's if anybody has any comments. But yeah, it kind of runs through some of the the technical workflow that I covered in the slides, but as well as let's see, what else do I have in here? Yeah, so
well, I personally think it would be very useful.
Yeah.
So when it's ready to share, it would be great if you could share it with us. And
Yep.
Because I think sometimes getting these open source tools accepted by our management, it depends on whether or not we have things like this in place where there is some governance. We've looked at the security and the risks, and also are the developers following these best practices and so on. Because one of the things we always got pushback on was that, well, these apps and the tools are being developed by the subject matter experts out in the domain experts. They're not the ones who are code developers. So there's always, well, what happens if the person leaves the agency? And so kind of training our those out in the the subject areas who are doing the development, giving them the tools and the training to help them develop code better, or in keeping with, say, what true computer scientist developers do. I don't know the right terminology, but I think will help us get buy-in from management and stakeholders. So anyway, things like this I think are super helpful, because more and more the subject domain experts who are developing the code need to be software engineers too. So learning how to do that, I think, is helpful. Great. Okay, so well, I guess we're kind of running a little bit out of time, but we do have a few minutes if anybody wants to raise their hand and chime in, ask Dave a question. I see there's some things going on in the chat.
Yeah, I was just looking at Eli's comment too about reproducibility, and yeah, that's where containers can really be helpful too, kind of capturing that snapshot of this is exactly what the environment was when you ran the analysis and things like that, and being able to take that to another machine and being able to replicate it. That's a really good point.
Yep, that's huge. Okay, great. Well, thank you for leading the way. So last chance, any questions for Dave?
Like I said, I threw my email in the chat. Happy to talk.
Well, thank you so much for.
I don't necessarily have a question for Dave, but I have maybe a request for Eli. I'd like to hear more about how you've been using Jupyter Hub and sort of the ins and outs of that.
Yeah.
But not right now. So, something to think about for the future.
Sure. Yep. Good stuff.
That's a great subject. I think we actually use it here at Census. I'm almost positive we use it, but I'm still trying to figure out all the different systems and the computing environments, and so I don't really know to what extent and where we're using it. But yeah, that'd be a great topic. Perfect. Okay. So one last thing I promised to, well, first of all, don't forget the Posit Conference, $49. That seems like a fantastic opportunity. So I may sign up. Anyway, the other thing I promised to mention was the R Govys seminar for September. Brandon Kopp is going to show us his app that he presented at JSM, the joint stat meetings that I missed this year. And it is kind of focused on text analysis. So he's done a lot of kind of text mining, text analysis on speeches given by the ASA president. So he's going to give his talk again for us at R Govys. So it should be interesting. Come with questions, and we will have a good and lively discussion as usual. So Dave, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you giving the talk today and being here with us. And thanks to Anne and Jeff for making this happen too.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This is great.
All right.
Thanks,
Well,
Dave.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll
Bye.
see you next month.